Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. Wherever you are in the world, my name is David O'Regan. I'm a cardiac surgeon at Leeds in the United Kingdom, and I'm the director of the Faculty of Surgical Trainers for the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. Last week we were talking about angles and operating at depth. Want to carry on that story of angles and geometry in surgery. The shoulder is a fantastic joint that enables your hand and lower arm to get into every position. You know that because you've taken a screwdriver and other implements into flat back cupboards and into spanners in a car. So your shoulder will get your lower arm into every position. And stitching is really pronation and supination. But in order to effect that, we need to, as in the previous series, hold the needle holder by palming it, and I call it the benediction sign. And this is achieved by placing it along the arm on the axis between the comma flexor origin and the index and middle fingers, like that. And then simply close your fourth and fifth finger over the ring. Extend your finger down and you use the needle holder by the opponent's pollicis, taking, I hope you can hear that, the ratchet on and off. And the reason why this is a very effective way to use the needle holder is, imagine you're holding a screwdriver, and I'll demonstrate that to you, pointing it into the camera. And I'll leave my finger out, and you can see for yourself the degree of rotation, pronation, supination that I'm going to get all the way round. And that's just beyond 270 degrees. And in that rotation, the needle point, or the tip of the riders, has stayed relatively steady. Now, if I put my fingers in, and we wouldn't recommend you do that, and if you had to, you put them at the tips of your fingers, as previously explained. But now watch what happens with the rotation. And I'll tell you what, I will get a pair of forceps through here just to help me demonstrate to you the rotation. So now watch the forceps with my fingers in. Okay, and I'm rotating it round, rotating round. You can see the tip of the riders rotating itself, but I'm now limited to just over 180 degrees. So that is why we would recommend you hold your needle holder in such a fashion. We explained last time the important part of stitching is to ensure you mount the needle properly, that you hold it at the tip and you angle it out, because that angle, as explained, is between the forearm and the horizontal, and between the horizontal and the needle. And this enables your needle to sit 90 degrees onto the tissue, such that the belly of the needle is pressing against the tissue itself. So let's continue these angle stories. And remember that your shoulder will get your forearm into every position. And that's why a microwave potato in a pudding basin is a very good start to practice your needle skills. We said that 90 degrees is in the sagittal plane to the tissue. I place it 90 degrees across what I want to stitch. And you will see here that I've drawn a line on the potato, and I'm aligning my needle 90 degrees across what I want to stitch. Now I'm going to rotate it back, and you might hear as I rotated it back, I've automatically unlocked my needle holder, and I'm pointing the point of the needle into the potato. I'm now taking it through the potato, rotating it on a clean rotation, using pronation and supination, and coming out. Now I'm using a sternotomy needle here, which is awfully difficult on a microwave potato without breaking the skin. And the idea is to do that repeatedly, and once you've gone through, pirouette it over the top, difficult with a triangular sternotomy needle, and repeat the exercise doing backhand. Now, one of the most impossible angles to deal with is actually down on this side towards me. And this is the angle that I find in cardiac surgery closing the aorta after an aortic valve replacement, and it's called the angle of sorrow. But the alignment of the needle is still important. It is 90 degrees across what you want to stitch, 90 degrees into what you want to stitch. But you can appreciate to get 90 degrees down there, you're going to have to make some adjustments to the position of your upper arm. And this is where I call it the screwdriver stitch. I've taken my elbow into the air, and now that my pronation supination is on the plane equivalent to the rim of the bowl, I can place the needle 90 degrees across one to stitch, and because I'm down there, I've now got it 90 degrees on the needle holder up in the air, and because my elbow and wrist are at the same angle and there's no angle between my wrist and elbow, therefore the needle's at 90 degrees. I take it back and I rotate it through the potato, or rotate it through the aorta. The tissue holds it, I deliver it on the curve and take it out again. And now that's a very awkward angle to practice, but you need to be standing properly to get your upper arm abducted, your wrist and elbow in line, and you're coming 90 degrees into. And that's a very awkward angle. And it's one of the impossible stitches to manage if you're trying to contort yourself into this position to try and get a backhand, etc., in that angle towards you. Now, appreciation of these different angles is necessary when stitching things that are round. Now, that might be the bowel, the esophagus, your ureter, or aorta, or a vessel, but round things, because the 90 degrees still applies. So I'm going to bring in the model I introduced, which is a dinner plate, and I've marked out on here various points. And 90 degrees, when you go round something, is actually 90 degrees to the radius. This is the vectors. So I've marked out where I am standing on the plate at 6 o'clock. This is 12 o'clock. To my right is 3 o'clock, and to there is 9 o'clock. So imagine, and I'm taking my needle angled out at the tip, as you can see there, that I'm starting to stitch. So I always stitch towards yourself. That's true with anything, including the skin, because then you're not tripping over the suture itself. So I'm going to start out here, and I'm starting effectively at 10 o'clock, and I'm going to stitch towards myself. And notice that I'm 90 degrees. I'm going to come down to 9 o'clock. Okay, I'm adjusting my body position now, not dramatically, but simply by changing the weight from my left leg to the right leg. And that turns the pelvis, and in turning the pelvis, turns the shoulders. So, watch that again. I'm there on my left leg at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock. I'm shifting my weight round onto my right leg, coming to 7 o'clock, and now predominantly on my right leg, 6 o'clock, almost stitching there, and this now becomes what I call the impossible angle. And the impossible stitch in surgery that you need to recognize is slightly different for me and you because of our body habitus. It is this angle here between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock. that I find I'm starting to stitch into the shoulder of my stitching arm. And in doing that, it makes it very awkward to actually rotate the needle through the tissue. It is in this position I therefore have to now switch to my left foot, or change the weight and change the needle and go to backhand. And you can see now that I can continue my stitching 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and you now find diagonally opposite that point you're stitching, you're now at an awkward angle. And again, we need to switch the needle to forehand. So if I look at the alignment between forehand and backhand, and I'm going to use my golf club again because golf was all about alignment, the alignment for me as I stitch around the circle is between 4 and 5 and 9 and 10. It's diagonally opposite, and you'll find that this side of my golf club here is backhand, and when I come to this side, it all of a sudden becomes forehand. And that is something that you need to recognize and understand and change your position when operating. This can be further practiced using another model. And in this situation, I have now introduced a banana. And the banana is a very unforgiving model. It again tells you if your needle is going in properly and out of the tissue properly. So I am going to use my banana, and I've taken apple core and taken a bit out of the skin, leaving the banana intact underneath. So if I put that on my plate to demonstrate the angles, and in the first instance I'm going to use a 3/0 and mount it out again, as you can see, and I'm going to start stitching towards myself. And I'll start further round so you can see me swapping to backhand. Now the idea here is that every time your teacup, or thinking critically under pressure, is place it 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. In other words, to the circumference. Rotate your needle backwards, and in doing so, unlock your needle holder. Point the needle into the banana, and then simply rotate the needle out through the banana skin. At no stage should the tip of this needle holder go into the banana. And you'll find, and I'll show you in a moment, this now is at my between 5 o'clock and 4 o'clock, and you can see that I am now stitching into my shoulder. I therefore have to swap feet and turn round, and we'll come back to sexy moves and pirouetting the needle over the point at a later date. So now I'm coming backwards again. Place it 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. Say this to yourself aloud. Rotate it backwards, unlocking the needle holder, place it into the lumen and rotating it out. And as you do this, you continue around your stitching. And this is done with your non-dominant hand behind your back, because next week we'll come to what you can do and practice with your non-dominant hand. You see, I'm trying to at all stages, and I'm accelerating through here to show you the angles and get to my forehand again. As I'm coming around, that was 9 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I'm going to accelerate again, out, and now I'm coming towards 11 o'clock. And it's interesting that we talk about 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And you must have realized by now that is important in describing anastomoses and thinking of the way you stitch, because although most of us have gone digital, we should be all familiar with the numbers on your clock. So you see there, I've reached that diagonal between 4 and 5 and 10 and 11, and I found that I had difficulty taking the stitch backhand. I've now changed my weight distribution by swapping my weight from one foot to another, and I'm now taking it forehand and continuing stitching towards myself and taking it out. Now, the great thing about this banana model, and I do commend it to you for practice, is that it will tell you whether your entry or exit is accurate. As I said last week, that the diver diving into the pool with a perfect dive doesn't cause a splash. So how does the banana tell you that? Well, it's like watching a photograph develop, because, and I'll try and do a bad one, and this is again what I mentioned last week, you practice till you can't get it wrong. So I have found trying to do bad stitches sometimes is actually rather difficult, but I'll deliberately pull that through to make the point. So I'm showing you there a banana, and you will know when the banana ages, it goes black, the skin goes black. But guess what? When you take your needle through the banana and leave it a while, the entry or exit points are clearly demarcated by these little dots going through the banana. And if I skidded the needle through, I wouldn't see a dot, I'd see a skid mark. So testing yourself at home in your practice, you can see how well you are doing by looking at this after you've stitched your banana. Are my sutures equally spaced around the banana? Do they come out cleanly from the banana, i.e. at 90 degrees out of the banana, therefore not skidding the surface? Are they radial and equally spaced at equal depth? There you go, like that. Now there's one other element on this banana model that is rather good. And it comes back down to the position of your needle on the riders. If, and I hope you don't now because you're going to go through that checklist of 1, 2, 3, just beyond the halfway, make sure that is aligned so you can't feel any gap between the shaft of the needle and the tip of the needle holder and angled out like that. Okay, so that's your 1, 2, 3 before you start. If you don't do that and you try and stitch with your needle not at the apex of your riders, then you'll find that you're sticking this in, and guess what? You start to mush the banana on the inside. So the banana model will also tell you if you're being clumsy, one in your rotation, but have forgotten to mount your needle properly, because the tip of the riders is going to mush the banana on the inside. And ideally, I want to see the banana on the inside not mushed as opposed to there. So coming back to this, you can see I did earlier, look at that little skid mark developing. And that was, I deliberately pulled that through to show you how this model can demonstrate good stitching. Now, good stitching is all geometry, and all the geometry depends on the functional anatomy of your upper limb. Remembering that your shoulder and pectoral girdle can get your forearm into every position you like. Up, down, round, back, and pronation, supination is not affected whatsoever, provided you hold the needle like that, benediction sign, such that the rider is aligned with the axis of rotation between pronation and supination. It's simply then going through, check 1, 2, 3, have I mounted my needle correctly, and then place 90 degrees to the tissue, 90 degrees across the tissue, rotate it back, point it 90 degrees into the tissue, because as we said last week, if you take a needle when stitching a button to a shirt, if it's not 90 degrees to the shirt, you'll find it difficult to go through. It's the same with a wattles weave or elastin and collagen in the tissue. So, my teacup, or thinking critically under pressure, with this is 1, 2, 3. Mount the needle correctly. Place it 90 degrees across what you want to stitch. It's easy if it's a straight line, but remember if it's a circle, it's 90 degrees to the circumference all the way round. Rotate the needle back. Point it in to what you want to stitch, and then simply pronate, supinate, and deliver the needle through the tissue, being careful to bring it out on the curve and cleanly without tearing the skin. And that is important when stitching any vessel or aorta. Too often I've seen trainees, when they're stitching vessels, push it down and they effectively put the needle into the lumen and go underneath and then pull it up. That's a bit like gaffing fish. If you take your needle 90 degrees into the lumen, and I'm doing it on the banana with this stenotomy needle, and bring it out, never during that rotation should you be mushing the banana, because it's only the needle that's going into the lumen at 90 degrees. So geometry, therefore, is very important when stitching. And to get eversion, you take up the tension when the thread is on the outside, so the two edges sit together perfectly like that. To get inversion, you take up the tension of the suture when it's on the inside. And for bowel, mucosa to mucosa, and therefore it inverts like that. Simple geometry, but the carriage of the needle through the tissue is of most importance. I hope this has made sense to you. I hope you've been practicing with your potato. Do try your banana. If you've got any other fruits or materials that you'd like to try and recommend, do let me know. I've got some material here from Organ-like, which is lovely soft material, and it does feel very, very much like an aorta, and I'll be speaking to them because it's this lovely stuff to practice with, but that's not available for you at home to practice. And the whole idea is that these simple models will enable you to practice at home on an ironing board, thinking about your posture, thinking about the angles. And I do commend to you, as you practice, you say it to yourself out loud, because as it's going round your head and all parts of the brain, you are hardwiring this into your practice. Remember, practice is doing it until you can't get it wrong, not until you can get it right. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I wish you well wherever you are in the world. It's either good day, good afternoon, good morning, or good night. Thank you very much indeed for your support. I have put on the Facebook page a questionnaire. It is anonymous, and I'd value your feedback as we develop this further. Thank you for all your support, and I hope you join me again next week at the same time. Be well and be safe.